Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on weather modification. We have our world famous speakers, Madam Ali Rice and Mr. David Smith. First, I would like to give chance, Madam Ali Rice.
Okay. Well, I don't know huge amounts of it about weather manipulation and modification, but I do know that they do. Kind of they seed and the clouds to, particularly in China. So during the Olympics, they could move weather on or clear the skies so I think and they send rockets of I think it's silver iodine or something. So anyway, there's also conspiracy theories that I heard about years ago about HARP and how they can send. There's a huge transmitter that can have massive effects on the weather. So I think, and it's also questionable. When we do the things that we do, what the kind of consequences of it are. And obviously, to try and kind of ease drought and things like that, there's obviously kind of serious implications of kind of climate change that we need to address as well. So there's, obviously it's the kind of science's way of trying to kind of improve things. So yeah, but it's quite a new kind of field to me. So I'm quite interested to see what other people have got to say.
Thank you, Professor David Smith.
Ali's right. It has a lot of applications, and there actually is a lot of ways other than just cloud seeding to alter weather. Weather modification is the deliberate alternation of atmospheric conditions by human activity that is sufficient to modify the weather on a local or regional scale. And so just kind of get a definition out there of what we're talking about. And this isn't something recent. The modern era of this started in 1946 by work at the General Electric Research Lab. And they were the first ones to begin to put in process ways to begin to modify weather. And they really did it by putting dry ice, so frozen carbon dioxide, into the atmosphere to cause rain to happen. And what they did is that carbon dioxide basically froze some of the water enough so that it got heavy enough to fall as rain. And since it was falling and everything, it thawed out and was rain before you hit it there. And Ali is right that silver iodine and lead iodine are often materials that can be used as part of that. Some of the other countries, particularly Russia and China, are actually more involved in weather modifications than we are here in the United States. But it's something that is being looked at wide scale, particularly in places like Africa and other regions where you have that. But the weather modification marketplace in the United States, actually the global, is in 2020, it was about a $152 million market cap. And it's projected that in 2027, it will be over $300 million market cap. So it's growing at a compound annual growth rate of 9.6%, which for something as complicated as this is there. Now, that growth rate could very easily go higher because of the increasing threat of water scarcity being there. We just don't have enough water. In fact, I believe many of the future conflicts of war will be based around water and those particular principles. And we're going to see that in all parts of the world, Sharif, particularly parts of the world you're living in, because water is something that I actually will predict that two of the nations close to you will be in armed conflicts with over the next several years because of water. But the water modification market is expected to expand rapidly because of the different end user sectors with it. So some of the end user sectors include agriculture, defense, aviation, entertainment, water management, manufacturing, the petro industry, the green industry. When you even begin to look at the alternative green energy industries, they consume a lot of water. And so governments are looking at how to expand the usage of weather modification technologies to improve water levels in nations like India. Like here in the United States, the Arab immigrants are trying to do it. And governments like those are really investing a lot of money. The country that has invested the most money in weather modification so far has been China, and where they're going. But according to the United Nations, water shortages will affect about 14% of the world's population this year. So it's a pretty big problem, and you see it. The Asia Pacific area has, like I said, the largest market share for weather modification with it. And then you go to the MENA region, and then you finally come back to the United States, and then EU. So those are a lot of the basic stuff on it. We can go deeper, but Sharif, I think this gives us a good background to continue. And you're muted.
Mr. Donald.
Good morning, everybody. My colleagues have given a great background. It's nice to have a new topic. Weather modification can be used for making more weather, and some of the dreams of it that it could be also used to change the weather in ways that makes it more kinder to us. For instance, preventing hurricanes and tornadoes, or at least mitigating them, making them a little less. And one of the dreams that some people have of weather modification is to perhaps use it to influence the problems that are starting to happen, have been happening and are increasingly growing worse as a consequence of global warming. And David touched on this. So it's funny that when I looked at the history of it, one of the first times people really thought of weather modification was during the Napoleonic Wars, and they felt that it rained more after battles. And that might be because what happens is that the little particles of dust, smoke, cause the water in the atmosphere to coalesce around them. And that's kind of what the cloud seeding does. It creates kind of something that the water is sitting there in the atmosphere, but it's gas. And then you have to turn that gas into water so that it turns into rain. And so the seeds then, for instance, are different, as people pointed out. And one of the seeds potentially is smoke. And that's actually been seen with forest fires and things like that. So they might have been onto something. Thailand tried in 1954 to seed clouds. So people have been doing it for a while. And as David pointed out, the country that's really into it is China. They were thinking that they could modify the weather so that they could have a good run at the Olympics. One of the things that's very interesting about it is we're really, really good at doing things that have unintended consequences. So suppose that there's a monsoon that's going along, and a country depends on the water from that monsoon. And a country upstream from that basically atmospheric river that's running along with all this water in it decides, well, we want the water instead of just like a regular river, like putting a dam on the river. And they start using some sort of weather seed the clouds or some other technique to be able to get the water to start coming down on their country, well, then the water doesn't get to the next country. So that's it has the potential to create new problems. And then I'm going to just mention one other thing is that beyond the idea of cloud seeding, there's been ideas of creating like basically reflective barriers or like kind of curtains by putting things in the atmosphere that block some of the sunlight or reflect some of the sunlight so that the amount of sunlight that gets to Earth is less. So what that would potentially cause is less heat from the sun coming to the Earth and mitigate the global warming effects we have. The worry with that, though, is that maybe if we did too much, we'd wind up actually causing an ice age or causing some sort of a problem. How do we control that in a way that makes it safe for us? So those are some of the things that are fascinating about this that make it interesting to me. It's a very science fiction-y kind of thing that's actually happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Adam.
Hi, good afternoon, or morning rather. Yeah, thank you, Sharif. This is a very interesting subject. I don't believe we've done this one before. At least I've not spoken of it here before. It is an interesting topic, a very interesting topic, and it's funny because it's one of those subjects that are usually spoken of in hushed tones along with other topics and subjects that are usually associated with conspiracies and black budget projects and top secret military experiments. And of course, the German pioneer Wilhelm Reich had interest in such things, one of his ideas being called cloud busting, I think it was, and he envisioned machines to achieve that, and of course he ended up being persecuted and died in prison. Weather modification and the technology involved in it have probably been around a lot longer than most people would assume. I would say all the way back to World War II or even earlier than that. It's interesting timing as well to be talking about this, I mean, because of course there is the Pakistani flood happening and the dreadful consequences of that. And I'm torn really because I can't quite decide if it's a sign that we should intervene more with weather and climate using the advanced tech we have now to try and save lives, or if it's a sign that we should stay away from the modification of something like the Pakistani flood as a result or unforeseen consequence of our advanced civilization and technology, and that if we do interfere, then we will end up causing even more damage and negative consequences. I am tempted to choose the former, that it is a sign that while we have made great leaps in areas such as medicine, quality of life, food, hygiene, all these things that our ancestors suffered more through, we still have plenty of things left to turn our attention to and try to synthesize technological deftness and humanitarianism. So yeah, those are my initial thoughts. Thank you.
Ali Rice.
Yeah. Okay. The other thing that I do know of that's always been denied as well is for a long, long time people have been aware of the chemtrails. And I think that even though it's kind of erring on the side of kind of conspiracy, I do think that, you know, that the chemicals in the atmosphere are something that, you know, we don't know what's released and we don't know the implications of what happens in the environment. And nobody does until the kind of after the event, really. So I think that's as ever, I'm quite cautious because I think nature's got its own way of doing things. And sometimes if we kind of get too involved and try and take full power over it, it kind of comes back to bite us. So yeah, so for me, and yeah, there was obviously the HARP, you know, the big transmitter thing that I don't know huge amounts of, apart from the fact that it had implications on the weather systems and the power to harness huge kind of difference in climate and the atmosphere. So I think the things, and I always, because we've got such incredible technology now, I always think as a layman or a laywoman that there's so much that we don't know about that they haven't even revealed, you know. So I think that there's all these disclosed things that they probably do that we have no foggy idea about. So I think the thing is that we're, in lots of ways, we only kind of see a glimpse of what's kind of possible, I think, and the potential they've got to do things even now. So yeah, I think that their ability is probably much greater than we even realize.
David Smith.
Yeah, Sharif, thank you again. And in some ways, we have been talking about most of this discussion so far on ways to use weather modification to have additional rain. One of the other ways, which is I think very important for us to consider, is I mentioned on some of your prior broadcasts that I took a vacation recently to the Dominican Republic, and the Hurricane Flora just went over the Dominican Republic with quite a bit of damage there, and it's now headed up the U.S. East Coast as a Category 4 hurricane now. But some of the weather modifications that have happened in the past is they were looking at hurricanes, and they were trying to do weather modifications on hurricanes using ice nuclear type of material to not increase the rain, but to decrease the intensity of the hurricane. And they had some works pretty limited so far on that one, and but they're seeing the case there, and they're also seeing the case that the same type of technology can be used with tornadoes, again, not to generate rain, but to decrease the intensity of the hurricane or the tornadoes. But as a result of this, they've actually found also that with certain circumstances, some of the cloud seeding in particular actually could cause droughts or end droughts. So it's not that you're 100% assured of doing increased rain, but it actually can make it more difficult. And thinking about this and looking at some of the information, I was surprised to know that on September the 16th of this year in Texas, the state issued a notice of intent to review rules for weather modification program. And that to me is interesting because I didn't know that Texas has had a weather modification program in place, and that there's over 200 companies signed up into it, and that it is really used heavily in West Texas to help us grow crops there. So this is a place where on the 16th of this month, they are looking at updating the law, and they're asking, is this law obsolete? Are there new technologies we can consider? And the answer for that one is definitely yes. And it's really out there and doing stuff. And I was blown away that this the Texas Department of Land Management weather modification program has been in operation for longer than 20 years. So once again, this is something that, as I said at the start, goes back, and it has a history of it. And by looking at this, they mentioned that there are state and federal programs and programs at the United Nations that will provide funds for weather modification. And so it's one that I think has some pretty interesting impact all the way around, and the different ways you can do it. But just the impact we have, particularly with the impacts of global climate change and the impacts of weather and the impacts of on different things, is one that we should continue to do research in. And there's enough innovative areas for me just doing a very quick look at some of them, that there's a lot of opportunities for universities. There's a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurship, particularly with the fact that there's money there that can be used and brought to bear. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Professor Dorothy.
Yeah, well, I think that was really interesting what David was saying about how Texas is involved with it, and I think as we research, we'll be able to find a lot of other places that are working on it that we hadn't really thought of. I found a great example of weather modification that was natural that we're trying to mimic. When I don't remember how old I think I was in my 20s. There was a volcano in the Philippines that blew up called Mount Pinatubo. And it was so massive that of an explosion that the whole entire Earth darkened. I mean, we had red sunsets for years. I mean, it was incredible. It put so much stuff all the way up, I think, to the stratosphere. It went many, many, many miles up into the sky, and it actually cooled the Earth. The entire Earth cooled down a degree or two for a year or so, and so people have been trying to mimic that. And there's a project that is taken place that from Harvard, where they've tried putting I think it's a sulfur compound into the atmosphere to cool it down. And I'm not sure quite what the results of it are, but people find that upsetting. It's an interesting fact, which is that years ago, not all that many years ago, but into the, I guess, 90s or so, the fuel that we used, the petroleum that we used in our cars, was augmented with sulfur compounds. And those compounds got into the atmosphere. And what wound up happening is that when they mixed with water, they'd form an acid, sulfuric acid, and that acid would come down in the rain, and it was killing lakes and all kinds of things. It was causing a huge amount of environmental damage. So it was also in coal. It was coal and petroleum. It was naturally in coal, and it was added to petroleum. And so everyone all over, it got banned in the United States and all over the world, and people stopped using it. And it worked. Because of doing that, the lakes came back, and things, it was a successful environmental intervention. But one of the unintended consequences of that is that it caused a little spike in global warming, because the sulfur compounds had actually been reflecting some of the heat, and it had increased. And so we know that it's possible for a couple of reasons, because we've actually seen it, to put things in the atmosphere that will reduce the heat. However, there's quite a bit of controversy on it, and it's worth reading and thinking about, because as Ollie and Adam and others have pointed out, it's we intervene in things, and that wind up having consequences that we don't expect, that are worse than the problem that we were trying to solve in the first place. So it's a little scary of a thing. I wanted to point out one fun thing about weather modification, which is that when you look up in the sky occasionally, depending on where you are, you'll see them more or less. You see the vapor trails of airplanes that are flying high in the air. And what that is basically water and a few other things that freezes as it comes out of the tailpipes of the airplanes that are flying. And it makes, you can see these lines just across in the sky. And those are called contrails and condensation trails. But there is a whole cult of people who call them chemtrails and believe that they're deliberately there to modify weather and also to put chemicals that control your mind and things like that. And it's a kind of an amusing cult. So no matter what we try and do, we're always going to find some people who see nefarious purposes. And then I do want to say one other thing about the idea that scientists have a lot of stuff that they have hidden from us. And that's not how science works, because a scientist can't make an observation that's of any value. It just can't happen. Because any human being is going to distort what they see, and you can't trust any person's observations. No one, not Einstein, not Edison, no one. And the only way that you can get trustworthy observations is if many people look at what you did, many people repeat what you did, people double check what you did, and so the more people that check what you did, the more likely it is that the observation that you make is accurate. And it's I love what Charles Sanders Peirce said, as he said, truth is an infinite amount of observations made by an infinite number of people over an infinite amount of time, which is basically makes it like in calculus a limit. It's something that you can never really reach, but emphasizes that it's something. Science is something we do together. It's a community effort. It's not something that people can do and just hide from you. So I wanted to point that out. So thank you.
Adam.
Thank you, Sharif. Yeah, when Ali mentioned the chemtrails, it reminded me of some strange things I noticed over the years. I was born in 1989. I'm 32 years old, and I remember in the 1990s and early to mid 2000s here in the UK, you used to see so many hot air balloons. Every summer, you would see the sky peppered with hot air balloons. Now, I can say I've seen only a number I can count on one hand across a couple of years. Same with microlights. Again, microlights were quite popular in the UK in the 1990s up to the early to mid 2000s. Again, every summer or spring, you would hear quite regular buzzing sounds of the microlights in the sky, people flying them, and you'd see a couple of hot air balloons at the same time. Now, you hardly see any. I'm sure it's simply down to changing tastes and interests of different generations, and that the boredom killing effects of smartphones might also have something to do with it. But it's something that makes me feel quite sad and melancholic. Same with gliders, engineless aircraft. My grandmother, bless her, went up in one once on her birthday, I think it was, and it was a treasured memory for her that she likes to talk about a lot with us, our family. Like with insects, if you went for a drive on a motorway on a nice day during that time period, your windscreen would be littered with impacted bugs and insects. That doesn't happen now anymore. And I'm struggling to remember the last time I saw a ladybird, even a common one like the standard red ones with the black spots, say nothing of the more novel colour schemes of the other kinds of ladybirds. I literally cannot remember the last time I saw a ladybird. And all these things together makes me feel sad and gives me the creeps a little bit as well, like we've changed worlds without us even noticing or something. Just my imagination, but some people report that even the sun feels different now to how it did when they were younger. Like it's harsher, whiter, like a giant LED, and not soft and warm and yellow and comforting like they say it was all those years ago. It's very strange, and perhaps it's China. I'm sure China are having lots of fun with weather modification, but I'm just joking. But of course, it can be used as a weapon. The population could become very demoralized if they were made to live under an overcast sky all year round. Weather affects culture, and culture affects weather. There's a connection, a link, a kind of feedback there, which we need to be careful of. Like weather patterns sculpting a gloomy and fatalistic population who therefore have no qualms about building a dark and gloomy industrial revolution which fogs up the land and sky even more, and so on. So lots of hidden connections we need to be careful of. So those are some thoughts I had. Thank you.
Ali Rice.
I interesting. That is really true, actually, because when you used to drive years and years ago, even 10 years ago, you used to constantly get insects on the windscreen, and you don't. And that's probably due to some pesticides and things that they use as well. So there's a lot of kind of, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's had a massive effect on the insect. And yeah, I think climate's definitely changed, because we've had the hottest temperatures in England this summer that they've ever recorded, and I also think so I've spent 10 years working in California as well, and the heat and the climate over here was equivalent to California for a good few weeks of the year this summer. So which is kind of I quite like the heat. Other people can't tolerate it. But sometimes I think that the kind of extreme weather patterns aren't just because of a natural climate change, or the consequences of industry as well. I think the petrochemical industry. The fact there's one documentary that I watched about the fashion industry and how the fashion industry. It was actually a contract from the UK. That the fashion industry used so much water that it took away a whole sea, and it was also putting toxic chemicals in the water sources that people were eating and drinking, surviving that. So I think the thing is that, and essentially because we were contracting overseas, we had no responsibility for the environment because it wasn't on the land. So I think the thing is that it's quite easy for the West to renege their responsibility and go and tap resources elsewhere because they're paying people to work. And I think that's another thing that our country, if we're if we're making those contracts, we need to be conscious and responsible for those too. So it's kind of connected to the environment, So I think there's consequences for everything we do, and I think that level of consciousness is really, really important to have.
Thank you, Professor David Smith.
Well, Sharif, I love the wide-ranging discussion we're having today with this. I mentioned earlier that there's multiple techniques, and to me, it's also looking at how different governments attack it too. So in the United States, France, Switzerland, and Argentina, Brazil, and other parts of South America, they do the weather modification, particularly to do cloud seeding by ground generators. And these look like big hat rats or big cell phone towers. And they do the seeding this way. And in that case, they use the air currents are expected to transport the chemicals into this supercooled parts of the cloud to do it. You begin to look in Australia, Israel, other countries, and even some in the United States. We also use airplanes for dispersing it. For the most part, the generators are under the wings of the airplanes and are dispensing stuff. But in some instances, they're using pyrotechnic devices. So in essence, big firecrackers to be loaded with chemicals, and then they're dropping those into the clouds and exploding there. In the Soviet Union, in Russia, they are using rockets fired for the ground. And they're using rockets with a pyrotechnic mode. with other chemicals to use it, but they are really doing it with rockets and with some of their large 70 millimeter artillery guns to change weather on a very local scale. And the military is using this to try to change the status in some of the land battles they're doing. They've also used it to try to set up either larger thunderstorms or decrease thunderstorms, again, with the different chemicals used. But another interesting application of weather modification I found was trying to reduce fogs. And there's been a lot of experimentation of putting ground-based dispensers around airports to disperse the fog so that airplanes have not to disperse as much and go to other places or be delayed. And there was a real interesting project that the government did earlier, particularly using calcium chloride. And the project was called FIDO, Fog Investigation Dispersal Operations. And they've done that, but they also even tried putting kerosene generators for heat along the runways to do part of it, because they were trying to decrease the relative humidity of the air. So again, other ways where weather modification has been used in some very interesting other ways. We've seen it with all types of participation type of movements. And one of the newest approaches they are trying, and the U.S. Forest Service is actually one of the leaders in this, is they're trying to modify the electrical nature of clouds. So what they're trying to do is decrease lightning, because lightning is the cause of most forest fires that are not human started. And so the application for this is interesting. They're also trying to look at how do I do what weather modifications on clouds to decrease hail. I know I've had multiple roofs and windows broken here in Texas because of hailstones that were the size of baseballs. And if they can use weather modification to disperse that, that is really, really good, I believe, there. And as I said, it's being used in hurricanes, other areas like that. And there is another set of weather modification that is being used where there are mountains. And what they're trying to do is change the radiation balance near the ground on that so that the snow stays snow longer, so that you don't have some of the trends that causes avalanches and other things like that. And that is a way to do it. So as we talked about earlier, there's a lot of other applications of weather modification besides just trying to seed clouds for rain. And that's why I believe this is such a very interesting area to go. And with the compound annual growth rate where it is, and with the fact that we are seeing all the droughts now, and we're seeing all the floods now, and we're seeing hurricanes become more severe, and we're seeing El Niños and other things like that becoming more severe, this is a perfect opportunity to bring innovation to bear to solve some of the problems that are affecting humankind. So Sharif, I think it's a pretty good answer too.
Thank you. Mr. Donald.
Let me turn this back on here. Yeah, I found an interesting article in Nature. I think, like a lot of things, when you get to the weather and the climate, that are important, is it's something that Dr. Talib always brings up, is that it's something we have to work together globally on. Right now, the world isn't too good at doing that. I think when Adam mentioned the consequences of living in inclement places, I was thinking of Russia, where the weather can be quite horrible. And they have a series of novelists who are some of the most depressing novelists of all. And they just have a very grim outlook on everything as far as I can see. And I was wondering how much it might have to do with the weather, though Finland has terrible weather, and in the summer they're very cheerful. But I will say they do get pretty crabby in the winter. There are experiments going on, and there's some people are going to use calcium carbonate instead of sulfur compounds and the IPCC, the organization that's been studying climate change, is actually for using sulfur compounds to cool the earth. There's something that we have to do something. And they think that it's actually relatively inexpensive, $1 billion, that's all, to cool the earth 1 to 1.5 degrees centigrade. And while that isn't going to directly address the core issue of the problem, which is petroleum fuels, which we need to get less of, it will indirectly affect it because the heat causes a lot of petroleum fuel to have to be used for the energy for air conditioning and other kinds of things. So it is something that not only has been done for a long time, but is actively being worked on. Could add a solution to some of the issues, right? I want to say that one of the things, if you're searching for this and you're looking for it and trying to find out more about it, there's another name that this goes by, and it's called geoengineering. And so if you're Googling around and trying to learn more about it, look for geoengineering as well. And surprisingly, there's an experiment that's done by some people at Harvard where they're using weather balloons to try and get basically these masking chemicals up in the atmosphere. And there aren't getting a lot of protests. You know, there's a few conspiracy nuts, but you know, almost everybody thinks it's an okay thing to do. So there's not a lot of pushback against it. Another interesting thing that people are doing is that they're spraying salt water on clouds, and it makes them 20 times as reflective as they normally are. And they calculate the amount of energy that it takes to do it versus the amount of energy that's reflected back into the sky, and there's a huge difference. That it is a very much net, basically positive effect in the sense that it cools things down more than it heats them up. I think that's really interesting, something you wouldn't really think about, like making the clouds more reflective. That's a whole different aspect of it. So it's something that's happening, and it's been happening for a while, and actually has the potential to mitigate some of the problems we're having with climate change. And so it's got two kind of difficulties. Well, it's got many things that we don't know about. One other I'm going to bring up right now is that the sulfur compounds do have that drawback that I said, that they can cause acid rain, and they also cause problems with the ozone hole, and they can conceivably make the fluorocarbons more stable. I mean, they're stable already, but they interact with them in a way that's not beneficial for us. And so they're trying to find other chemicals that could, like calcium carbonate, that they can use instead. But, you know, those are things that we can work out. So I think that weather modification can have a lot of potential, but the main thing about it that we have to address is the social and political issues of trying to figure out how we can do it in a way that every country isn't trying to figure out how to do it at their advantage with, trying to, and not caring about what happens to their neighbors.
Thank
Thank
you. Mr. Adam.
Thank you. Yes, like Ali said, we had the hottest summer ever this year. We had a summer where some days climbed all the way up to 40 degrees centigrade, which is really, really unheard of in the UK. It was freak weather. Hottest British summer on record ever. I'd never experienced anything like it. Much of the country had to come to a temporary standstill because of it, and many people had to stay inside for their own health and safety. I got a bit confident one day and I went out for a walk when it was up at around 40 degrees or so, and I really felt it. I really suffered. I very quickly regretted it. It was the first time heat and sunlight almost sent me into an anxiety attack or a panic attack. And I was so close to a tram stop. It was just several feet in front of me, and might as well have been 100 meters away. It was difficult to walk a few feet. Very daunting task, and being on the edge of panic as well. And I made it, but I had to squat in the shade as I waited for the tram. It was awful, really awful. It was like being hit with the death ray from War of the Worlds. So, yeah, weather could potentially be weaponized, either slowly chipping away at people with a never-ending overcast sky, or a quick attack with extreme heat. And Donald is right. In Scandinavia, the weather is responsible for a number of suicides. The Finnish, for example, like Donald said, the Finnish do have quite a fatalistic national character. So yeah, just a little anecdote there. And I noticed the Bill Gates blocking out the sun trope seems to have died off as well, interestingly. But yeah, thanks.
Madam Ali Rice, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
Okay, so I think it's interesting to see kind of the implications of what weather modification can do. But I think where there's always kind of a positive, there's also kind of untoward things that can happen, because there's definitely a United Nations thing that contravenes using it as a weapon. So the fact that they can say that means that it can be weaponized too. So as usual, I kind of err on the side of caution. And so I think we still need to think about the consequences of what chemicals we release into the atmosphere, because it affects us all in the end. So we all breathe the same air, and it's regardless of boundaries and countries and things like that. So whatever we do kind of comes back at us, really. So I think that level of consciousness is really important.
Thank you. Professor David Smith.
Sharif, good topic today. Global appeal, perfect for the timing. Like I said, the marketplace for this is growing very rapidly. Some of the drivers are the decline in rainfall, the number of droughts we see, the incidence of severe weather that we're seeing, raising pollution, increases in global warming. Some of the big restraints is the chemicals that we're using for weather modification are often toxic to other things in the environment. So it's that trade-off. Is the weather changes appropriate for the toxicity of the chemicals, particularly when it falls in the water basin? It's toxic to a lot of the aquatic life. The global impact to nations in the future, I believe, as we understand more, as we adapt new methods, as we become more efficient with our computer modeling tools, and as we begin to do more modeling, as we begin to implement weather modifications, I think it will really be helpful for the nations that are struggling with this as we're going. And I did a quick look, and today more than 70 countries have used some type of weather modification within the country at the nation level. So that number actually surprised me. I expected that number to be closer in the teens than 70. But you see that, and you see that the science behind weather modification is being taught at, it looks like, over 30 universities. So I didn't know I could go get a degree in weather modification, but it looks like we sure can. But to me, that's kind of my concluding remarks, that we know it's going. We see programs. One of the big programs that was in the press a number of years ago here in the United States was the HAARP program, the HAARP, which was a massive experiment in weather control that was using all different types of techniques, but particularly high frequency radio waves as a way to control weather. So we're seeing that. And Donald, I think that's my concluding remarks, and you're next.
All right.
We can go without Sharif.
Yes, I know. Well, I really agree with Ali that, you know, we've got to be careful about unintended consequences. What's interesting, what David pointed out, that's one of the reasons I'm really glad we have this topic, because it's great on the show for us to be able to start pushing some of the cutting edge things that people really don't know about so much, and bringing them to the forefront, exciting things that are going on with technology, because it's easy to see how, if you think about this can affect a lot of different things. Because what we can learn about weather modification also teaches us more about how the environment itself works. Because if we just passively observe things, we learn one thing, but if we actually basically like poke them in some sort of a way, we learn different things. Like we start to understand how there's responses to what we do. And so it's besides just being a way to help solve and mitigate some of the problems we have, and be perhaps benefited us in some way, like cool the heat in England. In California, we're having terrible droughts, and ironically, there's a fear in California that we're going to probably have one of the worst floods that we've ever had, that could be the most expensive environmental damage of any in the United States history. In 1861, we had a flood that was so big that it basically filled the Central Valley, turned the Central Valley of California into a giant lake. And there's that happens occasionally, and because of the increased water in the atmosphere, if that happens again, it'll be even worse. So the problems in the environment are something that, you know, we've got to find tools to be able to start changing. The key, I think, to making this work is cooperation. Because since there's 70 universities doing this, or 70 countries doing this, and 20 universities, I forget the exact same number, everybody in the world has to share what they're learning and share what they're doing. And as Ali said, that the United Nations has been looking at this and pointing out that it could be used as a weapon of war, and, you know, and saying no, you shouldn't do that. All of us have to get together. All of the countries have to get together, and that won't happen unless all of us as people understand what the responsibilities of our countries are. Because at least in a democracy, our countries are us, and how we talk to how we select our leaders and talk to them is what in their minds becomes important to them. And so this is something that's incredibly valuable to start educating people on, because as I said, the IPCC does see this as a way, an inexpensive way of actually mitigating global warming and helping solve some of the climate crisis that we're facing right now. So thank you.
Is it me next?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
After you, Ab.
It's been a very interesting and novel topic. It's a fun topic that gets my imagination going. I have no doubt that we will see more strange weather and climate happenings, and weather modification tech will be used more and more, regardless of how much so and so deny it, or however many treaties have been signed to mutually forbid its usage. The way I see it, if the technology is possible, then it probably exists already somewhere. And not only that, it's probably being used or has been used already and will be used again, regardless of legislation. We have genetic engineering, virtual reality, holograms, artificial intelligence, and now weather modification is following the path from science fiction and fantasy to reality. Intuition would say that weather modification would have gone from fiction to reality before seemingly way more advanced areas like genetic engineering and brain-computer interfaces, but it seems to be the other way around, where the modding still has more of a sci-fi aura than many of those other things, but it's coming. Those are my final thoughts. Thank you.
Well, we're not going to get Sharif's final pitch for the World Talent Economy Forum. So I guess.
Well, Donald, I think either you or I could do it almost verbatim by now. We've been on enough.
Yeah, that's probably true. Go for it, David.
Well, the World Talent Economy Forum has set up some very exciting new initiatives, actually in Bangladesh and other areas like that. And he's got tons of new conferences coming up. And one of the things he always asks us is to the people who are listening, the people who are participant, please share this. Share it with your government officials, share it with others, share it at the universities. For you that are entrepreneurs, please look and see if there's entrepreneur activities in this, because Sharif does an excellent job of picking topics that can not only be of interest, but they can enact change in the regions around the world. And one of the keys to this is a collaboration. And Sharif has set up some new incubators and some new programs and new conferences that are aimed to increase that collaboration and make the things work there. And I know, though, that none of the four of us that are on the screen can end this, but luckily Sharif is back. And Sharif, I just did your wrap up of listeners, please do this, please collaborate, please tell others about it, and talked about some of your exciting new initiatives. So since you're back, it's back to you. But I did my best Sharif impersonation as we were doing the close.
He was excellent, absolutely excellent, I've got to say.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. Tomorrow we have debate. So see you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Oh, that's funny.